Hello? I think we're ready to start here. Okay. Hey, welcome to today's history chats. I think the stream is live. Yeah, cool. So, hey, welcome. If you're joining us live, hang out for a couple minutes here, as always. And again, as always, if you're joining us after the fact, you're not here at just about 12:30 here. We will be going, about 3 minutes or so before we get started, 2 or 3 minutes. So if you want to if you're driving, watching the recording later, you can just skip ahead about 2 minutes. Otherwise, if you're here live, yeah, just kind of hang out for a second and we'll get started very soon. Um, yeah. Oh, just realized I started the stream by bumping the microphone. Whoops. This week I remembered to mute the desktop audio so you can't hear the echo as I check things. All right. So again, just keep talking here, just as make sure that this is all coming across okay, but I think it should be. Yeah, cool. So, hey, hello. Let's see here. While we're waiting here, let me just take a moment to say thank you to our sponsors, Yankee Bookstore, and for this week or this month, we've been sponsored as well by the Friends of the Wausau Historic Landmarks. So thank you to them and to all of our members, of course, for their support of the history here at the Marathon County Historical Society. We really appreciate that. If you're interested in supporting local history and our organization for these programs or exhibits or just the preservation of local history, if you're not already a member, that's probably the best way to do that. So you can always get in touch with us or go to our website, marathoncountyhistory.org, and learn more about that. So today, let's see. Hey, I think that should be. Just going to double check. Okay, good. It looks like everything's working. Cool. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about the depots. Before we get into it, though, I want to just take a moment to say, hey, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, corrections, whatever, at any point, please feel free to put that into the chat or comment section as you're watching. Right now, I'm not going to pay attention to that, but I will come back and have some question and answer times at the end of the program. I think that's all the business. So yeah, let's get into it. So yeah, today we're talking about the railroad depots as part of Historic Preservation Month. When everyone back and corrected this graphic, whoops, yeah, close enough. Depots, yeah. So depots are interesting because I guess what I'll say about depots is, you think about it, anytime that a train has to stop, I don't know that there's many communities that emerge that are around today, towns and cities, villages that never had a train. Most of them emerged with the trains or before it, but yeah, pretty much every place has a train by this point. And certainly in the heyday of train travel for passenger service, anytime that you wanted to get off at a population, a city or a village or little stop, you'd have a depot there. And yet, a lot of these depots are no longer here. But in Wausau, we have a couple of them, which is kind of interesting. Now, before we get too deep into this, let's just kind of go over. Oop, it's the wrong button. Here we go. Let's talk about how the trains came to Marathon County in the first place. So in 1871, Marathon County makes a deal with the Wisconsin Central Line. And the idea here is, hey, we want a train. They would like to, so the guy who owned the Wisconsin Central, a guy named Mr. Reed, Judge Reed, I guess. I don't know if he was a judge at this point, but he certainly was at some point. Anyway, he's an industrialist, has some interests, and he decides, oh, it'd be really great to get a railroad up into Wisconsin. There's a lot of lumber, especially up north where there's, iron and ore and stuff like that. So, if we can get a train up there, we can kind of extract that. It'd be good for business. And so he wants to get a line up to central Wisconsin. And so Marathon County says, hey, and here we're, talking about Wausau. They say, hey, let's get the train to come to Wausau, which is kind of a win-win. Wausau gets connected to the train line, so people have to go through Wausau to get to Lake Superior, and also for the trains, they get another population, another more people that are using their trains. So they make a deal that they say, hey, we will subsidize. We'll basically, float a couple bonds. We'll get some money. We'll get some land, and we'll give you the land so that you can build the train line, the railroad up to Wausau. Except, well, it doesn't work out quite that way. Because essentially the farmers in the community decide, we don't really like that idea because we don't really see the point in having a train. Like, that's great for the city, but not so much for the farmers. Not necessarily the most, didn't age the best because trains are good for farmers in the long run. But for the time being, it's a lot of expense that we'd have to taxes that we'd have to take the burden of. So they kind of say, nope, we're not doing that. And instead, the Wisconsin Central goes a different direction. Now, it does end up going, and I put Gardner Colby here because he's the only individual from this story that I really have a picture of. I didn't dig too deeply, but at least public use image that I can find. Gardner Colby is an interesting guy. So he's an acquaintance of Mr. Reed, or sorry, Judge Reed, and he says, hey, if you need, I hear you're building some trains. I got a construction company. I can build. He's in Boston, but he says, hey, I got a construction company. We can build the trains for you. And so he says, okay, great. And then he gets the job, and he says, uh-oh, I don't know how to do that. Because he's never built a train. He just kind of like, you inflate you're lying on your resume a little bit here. And so he then gets the expertise of an engineer named Elijah Phillips, and they form the Phillips and Colby Company. And I mention that because the line that they end up putting through central Wisconsin doesn't really go to Wausau. The main line actually in 1872, the first train service that ends up going into Marathon County actually goes along the western edge here. It goes right along the western edge. That's, the cities of Spencer, Colby, Abbotsford, those communities right on the, way edge of the western part of the county, they come there because the railroads go through there, because that's where they get the land to go up. So, for example, this depot here, I'll give you a moment to take a guess. Where are we here? Anybody? This is where I would look at the chat and see if anybody would answer, but there's a little bit of delay, and it's Colby. And I want to talk about Colby specifically. I mean, obviously, this is not the train station that was built in 1874, right? Or 1872, sorry. Or maybe it is. I don't think it is. This is certainly a postcard from later. But the story is interesting here because there was no Colby when the railroad went through. I mean, there was an area, right? And there were some people living in the general vicinity that apparently called it Salem. I don't know how, close to this area that was called, but that's one of the sources that said that. But now we have a train station here. They actually built stations knowing that there would be people to come to make cities there in the future, rather than have to go through an existing city. So that's what they do. They decide to name it Station 51, which isn't great. I've also seen it said to be 52, but I think it's 51. For example, Spencer was Station 40. So we had these stations. They, in this case, we needed a name for it, and the guy in charge decided to name it after the son of Gardner Colby, Charles Colby. That's how the name Colby comes to be attached to the community of Colby. And then later, when they have this new type of cheese, it gets named after the type of the community that it's from, which is named after the station, which is named after, this guy. So kind of interesting history. In this case, the station, the depot, literally gives the identity, the name to the people here. Okay. But as I say, it does go through here. Eventually, though, we do get this line here as part of the Wisconsin Central, or actually, I think this is the Wisconsin Valley, which might be similar here. But we do get it to Wausau in 1874. There'd been a little delay in 1873, some depression, some financial stuff. So it takes 1874. Finally, we do get the depot, or not the depot, the train station here. Now, this is one of the train stations. We have two. We'll get to that in a second. This one is Grant Street. So this is currently on Grant Street, although it wasn't always. So how this building gets built in 1901 starts with the story of that Wisconsin Central line, which comes in 1874. Right, we finally got that through. And again, there's also the Wisconsin Valley Line. I'll be honest, I don't entirely know if these are interchangeable or if they're, is the Wisconsin Valley Line as part of the Wisconsin Central. That's something that I actually was just in the library trying to confirm. This is one of those things with trains is sometimes it's very difficult. Like it can be kind of difficult to sort out. It also shows the volatility during this period because in the 1870s, this was not a sure thing owning a railroad. They end up going bankrupt. And in 1880, by 1880 it gets purchased, or at least part of the line does, by the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, at least the jet to Wausau. They, throughout this period, there had been a depot, a passenger depot, actually south of the Grant Street location. It was kind of near Washington and Jefferson, kind of where that intersected. But now, after Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, in 1901, they built this building. It's also worth noting, just while we're talking about railroads, they do eventually add the N Pacific. They're also often called the Milwaukee Road, although from what I can tell, that maybe not their official name at any point, but it's what they called themselves. It's sort of like a colloquial name that they used officially. At any point, it's not necessarily like I'm not going to ask, there's going to be no quiz at the end of the presentation here about this. I just kind of wanted to show so that can be kind of volatile, the railroads. But by 1900, we kind of settle into, how things are. On the other hand, there's a second railroad that comes to Wausau. This one, the depot here, you can see is on Washington Street, looking west towards the west side of town. This was built when the train station came. Well, okay, so this depot wasn't built until 1889 or 1899. But the train that came through actually came in through the Eland area. That was kind of the main jut of the Milwaukee Lakeshore and Western Railroad. And this then eventually gets purchased or becomes part of the Chicago and Northwestern, or just the Northwestern sometimes. And they're the ones that build this passenger depot on Clark Island. So Washington Street is just this little jut, and then there's the bridge here, the southern edge. So yeah, that's the two depots. And so Wausau is a city with two depots. Well, two and a half, depending on what you want to do. We'll get back to this one later on. But for now, let's just kind of take a look at the depots themselves. So looking at the Washington Street Depot, does very well initially. 1899 it gets built. It's used. It's the heyday of train travel for passengers. And even by like the 1920s, when automobiles are starting to replace horse-drawn buggies and things like that, you still have trains being the main way to get around. Like, yes, you can get in your car and drive, around the town, or even, to next. You could go down to Mosinee or up to maybe Merrill or something, but you're probably not going to get in your automobile in 1920 and drive to Chicago. That would be a long and difficult journey. The cars don't really run very, smoothly, and the roads aren't particularly great, especially long distance. And so people are using the trains. But by the 1950s, we start to see all of that shift. The adoption of car culture in the United States, the, development of better automobiles, the creation of interstate highways are really important as just, not even only that, but like county roads, city streets. These all improved quite a bit to the point where by the end of the 50s, nobody's really taking the trains in the same way that they were before for passenger service. So by the end of the 1950s, the Washington Street Depot stops being used. They stop running passenger service through on this line. It gets used for a little bit as a bus depot for the city of Wausau before they build another facility more permanently. And that brings us to Billy Moy, or Ying Fuk Moy, I think. I'm not going to try to pronounce it in the Chinese. I did entertain trying to do that, but I don't speak that very well. But yeah, he was originally, he's Chinese. He's at the age of 16, fled China and became a refugee to the United States. Came to Wausau because his grandfather actually ran the first Chinese restaurant in Marathon County, which was out of the Hiawatha. So he comes here at the age of 16, doesn't speak any English, ends up graduating through high school. It's tough experience, but he makes do and he manages to learn the language, and ends up going to Chicago for a little bit to work at, or to study at the Chicago Art Institute. And then he decides, he says later that he got hungry and decided, maybe I want to be a restaurant person after all. So he comes back to Wausau. He kind of ends up taking over the Chinese restaurant from his grandfather at the Hiawatha. And in 1966, he buys the Northwestern Depot. And there's a renovation project to turn it into a restaurant, which it is. It's called Billy Moy One World Inn. And yeah, this is I think at this point more people probably remember this being the old use of this building than actually as a depot, since it's been, I don't know, 70 years, 60 something years since the last time that passenger service went through this place. So he, yeah, operates the Chinese food, the Billy Moy's here, until about 1993, and he moves out. It then goes over to Marathon Travel. The travel agency moves in. Again, there's a big renovation project, a restoration project. A restaurant isn't great for offices, so they gotta, turn it back into offices and things like that. So they do that, and they stick around for a little while. By the 20th century or 21st century, travel agencies aren't necessarily in the most demand, certainly not as they once were. And so they moved out I'm not sure exactly specifically when they move out, but they do move out in the early, I want to say the early 2000s, but maybe late 2000s as well. And there's a number of different places that have kind of cycled through there since. Today, the Bates Legal Group is there. Methadone Clinic was there. Lots of different uses for the building. Okay, so then there's the other one, of course. This is the Milwaukee Road, or any of the other versions that you want to do. This was the 1901 building. This gets used a little bit later. The last passenger service, though, does finally go through in 1970, which ends a long, decades-long period of using this as the entryway into the community. So what happens to it? Well, for a couple years, the Milwaukee Road continues to use it as freight offices. So the freight staff use it as their offices. But in 1977, they move them out and they sell the building to Employers Mutual of Wausau, who you may know. If you know of Employers Mutual, or Wausau Insurance says they're going to change their name in a few years, you probably are familiar with this image, because this is their logo. This is the original ad that ran in the Saturday Evening Post back in 1954. And by 1956, this image created by Everett McNear became their logo. This represents Employers Mutual. I did a whole program on this a couple weeks ago, by the way. If you're curious about that program and how this all came to be and the importance of how this put Wausau on the map, go back and watch that. But for now, I think I'm just going to kind of jump ahead. Obviously, this becomes very important to them then. And even in 1978, they're still, it's a big, probably even more than they did in the late 50s. This is really important that this depot stay around, because this is who they are. So they buy it, and they decide, they announce plans to move it. They're going to move it out to the West Hill. They're going to pick it up and move it out there. And they're going to make it the entryway to their new Westwood Training and Conference Center. The idea being that as you want to get in, this is where people would be greeted. They'd have to go through there. It'd be the greeting station, sort of the welcome area, maybe a little bit of a museum for some history there, and then you'd go in. But there's kind of a double-edged sword here when it comes to this depot, because even though the Employers Mutual, it becomes part of who they are, it's also a big part of the city of Wausau. And so there's a community that, the Landmarks Commission had been started back in '75, got off to a little bit of a rocky start, and because they weren't able to save the Fowler Mansion initially. That was kind of a blow, but now we're being organized. The historic preservation movement in Marathon County is a little stronger, and when they see this, they say, "Okay, we're going to stop this," because they don't want it moved. That ruins part of the history, the integrity of it. It's better than having it destroyed, but that's really not what they want to see. So they created an organization, a committee to save it. They have meetings. They have a Save the Depot petitions that were circulated. So And by this point, I don't know officially there's not a lot of communication specifically about what their plans are. By this point, apparently, there's at least some fear that they're going to demolish it rather than move it, um, which is not great either. Ultimately, the thing that they did here that was successful, whereas the Fowler Mansion and other examples of buildings don't do as well, is they were able to find a home. The Boy Scouts need an office space, and the Samoset Council ends up moving in there. They agree to take over the building and do some renovations. They put a couple, $15,000 to $20,000 were expected at this in this article here, to convert the interior of the depot for their offices. And this is something that I don't think that the Employers Mutual wanted to destroy it. For most of them did. I don't think, certainly it's not great for PR destroying the building that represents you. So if they said, hey, if you come up with a better solution, we're happy to hear it, and here's a better solution. And so the Boy Scouts move in, and the building gets saved. Which brings us back to this one, because this is that third depot. Well, it's kind of it's a replica depot. When they realized that they couldn't move it out to their training center, Employers Mutual decided to just build a replica, and so they spent a couple $1 million building a replica up on the hill there, complete with the train tracks that don't go anywhere, but nice set dressing. And yeah, it's still there. It is still being. I mean, if you find it, it's kind of not. It's a little off the beaten path, but it's there. And yeah, I don't know if this counts as a full depot, but it certainly shows that. Now, eventually, the Scouts move out of the depot to Camp Phillips, where they have a new facility. Let me see here. I was going to have this ready. Does this work? Oh, that's the wrong tab. Hold on. Got a little ambitious. Here we go. So that's the Camp Phillips building here. Using Google Maps, you can see that. Anyway, that's the offices that they go to, which leads it to a question of, okay, what are we going to do with this, the depot? And there's not really a good answer. Again, it kind of, we don't know what we're going to do. But eventually we have a solution that some people buy it and they turn it into the Timekeeper Distillery. So that's Dan here. He and his wife buy the building, turn it into the Timekeeper Distillery, which is one of the good options. Depots are kind of tough in that, like, Wausau High School becomes apartments. You can make things into apartments or new office space and things like that. In some ways, a depot is not that large, so you can't really cut it into apartments and make it feasible to make your money back if you're a developer. But a distillery, in Green Bay, there's the microbrewery, I think. So this is one of the ways that depots get reused sometimes, and so yeah, thankfully so. They're now it's still around, right? So that in kind of a brief overview here is the railroad depots. Yeah, and again, it's interesting because as I started at the very beginning, so as I was putting this together, I was wondering, well, this is strange. Why does Wausau have 2 to 3 depots still around when many communities don't, right? Depots were everywhere. And yeah, we had some pretty nice depots that were built here, but there were nice depots in a lot of places. So, why not? And I think it has to do with, that association with Employers Mutual, certainly the logo. It's a big part of the city of Wausau's identity. And so, I don't know, I don't know if people now have that same association. They don't necessarily think, because Employers Mutual has not been, that logo has not been used for quite a while. But still, I think that there's this kind of carryover, and there's a fondness of, even though we haven't been using the depots for train travel for such a long time, that doesn't mean that there isn't still an attachment to it, which I think is very common through the successful buildings. You don't see a whole lot of jails. There are historic jails in Wisconsin that you can go and visit. Certainly that sort of thing. But in terms of historic preservation and trying to repurpose a building to something that's going to be more sustainable long term, I think there often needs to be sort of a fondness. It's something that, like the Plummer Mansion. And one of the reasons that from a couple of weeks ago, one of the reasons that kind of hurt so much that was gone was not because of the plumbers. And it's not entirely because of the great architecture. It has a lot to do with the fact that, hey, that's where Channel 7 was. That's where people went and you turn on your television, you saw, before I got into politics, there's Walter John Chilton reading the news, or, you got to go in and be part of the studio audience for Rudy the Wrangler. Like there's a positive association there. So, and I think the depots have a very similar thing. I say all of that to kind of intro back here to our last topic for Historic Preservation Month. Next week, Gary Gisselman will be back, and he'll be talking about Grant School, which is a very recent sort of concern, I guess. Yeah. But also has its own long history, and yeah, so that'll be an interesting talk too to kind of get an insight into that process, and yeah, so I hope you join us for that, and like always, it's 12:30 on Thursdays, as we do every week, and yeah, so hope you join us for that. Also, while I'm plugging future events that are coming up, this Saturday we have our next History Speaks, which is a little bit more in-depth look at a topic, and we have Brent Zinkel is going to be coming and talking about the influenza in 1918 and see how, this is, at this point, I don't know if we're sick of hearing about pandemics, but I'm sure this would be a very interesting look at, how Wausau responded to the flu, and what it, how that exists. So again, this will be on 2 o'clock this Saturday. Same place you're watching this now. If you're watching this after the fact, and it's after Saturday, you can always go back and watch the videos as well as all of our programming. So cool. Thanks for watching. At this point, I am going to go over, let's see here. Can I just go? Didn't put a nice screen. Let's just do this again. Okay. So if you have any questions or comments, I'm gonna check here. I don't know if anybody has left any comments, but if you have any, oh, there's quite a few here. Cool. Okay. So there's some interesting questions here. Some of which, like, I know Christine Martins asked whether how many turntables. That you're asking the wrong person, I think. I'm not a railroad enthusiast to the same extent that there are people who would better serve to answer that. But it's a good question. Um, I kind of had to quick struggle to, or not struggle, but quick figure out the history here for this. So I don't have that at my fingertips, but maybe we can get that answer later. There's some personal experiences of people who, let's see, John was talking about his, he worked for the railroad, and grandfather worked for the Sow Line. Cool. Yeah, a lot of railroad history. Again, this is just kind of a snippet of little bits here in this area, but yeah, cool. Well, I think we're kind of at that time anyway. Again, if there are last minute questions, this is last call. Otherwise, I think maybe we'll call it a day. Cool. Well, thanks again for joining us. I hope you all have a lovely afternoon, and we will see you next time.